Hello there, fans of triathlon. Welcome back to This Week in Triathlon. I'm your host, Kevin Tedonio. And as you can see by this giant glass of Cabernet in my hand, the season is drawn to a close for myself, but there's actually still quite a lot to talk about in the triathlon world. So without further ado, I'm coming to you from Folsom, California, joined by my co-host, Andreas Dezoglu, coming to you from the Bay. How's it going, Andreas?
It's going pretty good. I don't have a glass of wine in my hand. I kind of wish I did. I didn't get the memo, but things are good here. It's getting a little bit chillier, a little bit foggier, and a little bit darker a little bit earlier. But I'm happy to be here, happy to be talking about triathlon. And like you said, there's a little bit to talk about this week, even though we're drawing to a close for the season.
Yeah, so right on the backs of Ironman Florida, we had Rev3 last weekend. Moving a little bit further down the coast from Panama City Beach in Naples, Florida. This is kind of an exciting race because it's not a WTC race. It's one of those other independent brands. It's Rev3, obviously. The prize money was double that, more than double that of Ironman Florida just 2 weeks ago, and actually less than that. Just it was only a week after. So athletes like Andrew Starykowicz, he did the double, did the full, and did the half, and pulled it off, got the win. Not all athletes can do that. Even the same athlete has a hard time doing that from time to time, so surely his legs are hurting him the next day. And on the women's side, Meredith Kessler, after a great race in Kona, getting her legs back and clearly showed that she's on form. And I believe she's on the start list for this weekend's Ironman Arizona in Tempe. So it'll be interesting to see how she fares.
Yeah, and Meredith, I think it's easier to do, and you probably would agree, it's a little bit better to go from a 70.3 to the full distance than the other way around, which is what Starykowicz did. Nonetheless, he did well at Rev3 Florida. Like you said, one of the few races that's not quite on the same level as WTC, but quite popular. But yeah, so Ironman Arizona coming up. A lot of names both on the men's and women's field, and a little bit of a different course as well, which we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that.
Now, Ironman Arizona is one of the premier late-season races. It is absolutely stacked for the men's and women's field. Some huge names, and some big debut names that we've never seen moving up to the Ironman distance. So we have new names on a new race course. The run course has changed considerably. And I think this is going to be actually for the better. It gets a little bit congested there at Ironman Arizona for the faster athletes on lap 2 and 3 coming through a lot of the age groupers. There's going to be, I think a few less turns, so that's always nice. So we might actually see this course be sped up a little bit. The swim is one of the easier swims on the circuit. Very easy to navigate there in Tempe Town Lake. And the only problem you have there is the sun kind of facing you in the eyes as you start. But as the athletes head out into the hills, just northeast of Phoenix, out on the Beeline Highway, out past the Waste Management Landfill. Hopefully they do a good job sweeping the course, because there's always a lot of threats of punctures. We saw Sebastian Kienle puncture there 2 years ago, and there's just a lot of traffic and a lot of road debris, especially near that landfill. So I know Matt Charbot was talking about all the road debris getting flat, so hopefully do a good job sweeping that course, because it's a fast course, and hopefully we see some athletes getting some PRs.
Yeah, and both you and I have experience not only racing, but just going on the course quite a bit, because it's one of the more popular routes. And obviously when you're not racing, you have to ride on the shoulder, which has a lot of debris. On race day, you actually get to go on the nicely paved road, which is a lot better. But like you said, there is some debris, and people might have to take some measures for that, such as putting stands in your tire, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. But a fast course, I think there's like 300 to 400 feet of elevation per lap, which is nothing. The weather is always interesting. It seems like it's windy. You have a little bit of a headwind as you head north on the Beeline, a little bit northeast on the Beeline, and then a tailwind when you come back into town, except for later on in the race, that tends to switch around, and for whatever reason, you have a tailwind going up and headwind coming down. But yeah, like you said, it'll be fast. There's a lot of people on the pro field doing it. One of the races that sells out the quickest. So obviously the weather and the lack of a challenging course, or the ease of the course, has a lot to do with it. In Arizona this time of the year is just really nice. So I'm sure we'll talk about the results next week. And yeah.
Yeah, so I think the big news, I think the kind of the juicy scoop people wanted to talk about this week was the doc, Brett Sutton, the triathlon coach from Australia, the self-dubbed best coach in the world. Actually, I think a lot of people consider him to be one of the best coaches, best minds in the sport. Certainly has a lot of experience. Came from a boxing background, came from a horse training background. I've heard him speak of athletes as if he wishes they were like horses, just didn't ask questions, just did their training and raced as hard as they could. So Doc spoke up this week. He left Team TBB, the bicycle boutique, with the biggest sponsor on that team. Apparently there was some friction. Brett Sutton is a very outspoken person, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily being outspoken. I think it's just his how he's perceived. He's very brash. Anyone that follows him on Twitter knows he is not polished. This guy does not have a filter, I don't think, built into his brain or mouth. Certainly not on his phone. So unfortunately, I don't think he has a handler working his PR. Maybe Andreas could help him with that. But anyways, Doc.
Or spell check, for that matter. He doesn't have spell check on his phone or his computer, which is very odd nowadays.
But, people listen to this guy because he has trained some of the best athletes in the world. Chrissy Wellington, and the list goes on and on. James Kunama, Jody Swallow. He prides himself on taking athletes that he considers to be, maybe not the most talented athletes in the world, but people that are driven, people that have a vision, that have a dream, and are willing to do whatever he says. Because whatever he says, from athletes I've spoken with, I've worked with him, it's either his way or the highway. He has no problem sending you back from Cozumel or Switzerland or wherever the hell they're training at. He will tell you to get out of camp and get lost if you're not following the plan. So it's his way or the highway. And unfortunately, with the bicycle boutique, Team TBB, and his team down there, it's based out of Cozumel right now. It looks like they had a parting of ways. Whether it was a mutual breakup, I don't know if we'll get any details there. But it sounds like, at least according to Brett, that it was a mutual departure of ways. And Brett said he wanted to use this opportunity to have a platform where he was independent, able to speak his mind, because he wants to improve the sport. And he wants to improve the sport, particularly for pro athletes and how they're treated. And, regardless of how well this guy speaks or types or tweets, I think his heart is in the right place. And anyone that has seen the video that was posted, or he actually has a website up now, I think it's called, do you know what it's called, Andreas? I think it's called The Doc Speaks or something like that. And just like him, it's a pretty crude website, but it's really just a platform for him to be able to speak his mind.
Yeah, and the video, he's a lot better. He speaks a lot better than he types on Twitter, and I think you hit the nail right in the head when you talk about the fact that his heart is in the right place. And in my opinion, there may have been a little bit of conflict of interest with Team TBB and some of their sponsors and the affiliation they may want with WTC, and his heart being somewhere else and not wanting to support the WTC. I tend to think that maybe he just doesn't have a good grasp on reality and just has a little bit too, he's thinking a little bit too positively about the potential for people to make money in the sport. I just, unfortunately, I'm just one of those that just doesn't see there being much potential, just because it's in a lot of ways it's a very niche sport. But he has pretty big visions at this point.
Yeah, I think he's been quoted in the past. There's no reason why Ironman triathletes shouldn't get paid like NFL players or top soccer players or top Formula One.
Which it's pretty delusional if you ask me. I mean, absolutely, it comes down to what do those players bring into the league and the revenue that they generate versus versus what they're taking out of it. And you can't. There's nobody that can argue that the professional triathletes at any level, even in the ITU and the Olympics, which are bringing in potentially more than longer distance. I don't think anybody could argue that there's nearly that much potential.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the top highly paid athletes around the world, I mean, you have some athletes making upwards of, the high tens of millions of dollars. Tiger Woods, I think, last year made the high 70 million range. A lot of that coming from endorsements. And I don't think triathletes, justify that kind of income, because if you think about it, there has to be a return on that investment. When you have athletes like Vodafone that sponsor Michael Schumacher or Ferrari, these are big companies that are able to brand athletes that get hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of viewers to watch their Formula One car or their golf bag or whatever it is, sneakers on the basketball court. People follow that, and they have fans and spectators and millions of them, tens of millions of them, hundreds of millions of them. And not a lot of people watch triathlon. Even Andreas, myself, some of the most ardent triathlon fans you'll see, we're not going to watch an entire 8-hour Ironman typically, and that's a fast Ironman. But here's the deal. So if golfers make a ton of money, I used to be a pretty serious golfer, and I spend way more money now on the sport of triathlon than I ever did in golf. And golf's not a cheap sport when you think about greens fees and clubs and all that. And I think a lot of people that are in the sport of triathlon, age groupers, there are a lot of athletes. If you're looking to do an Ironman, you're probably looking at no less than $10,000 throughout the course of a season. I'd say maybe upwards of $20,000 plus just to train for an Ironman. That includes the travel, doing the race, maybe a coach, all your nutrition, and that doesn't include all the opportunity costs. But I think that the fact of the matter is, Andreas, is that there's a ton of money that is spent in this sport, whether it be with race organizers or with equipment. But the trickle down to the athletes is pretty paltry. And it's interesting because from an athlete's perspective, who doesn't want more? Athletes want more, more, more. But that has to come from somewhere. There's not just an infinite amount of money out there. So who's going to pay these athletes? And I think for athletes, you kind of differentiate yourself in different ways. Some athletes are very, very good, and they get attention just because they race well and they win races, and people look at their jersey or what they're racing with. And some athletes, they might not be the fastest athletes, but they're maybe well perceived, and people follow what they say. Like Brett Sutton, I really think pro athletes deserve better. Whether or not that's WTC's fault, it's easy to poke a stick in WTC's eye, and I've done that myself, but it's just because they're the biggest kid in the classroom, I wouldn't say they're a bully, but they're the biggest one there. They're the easiest one out there, and I think Brett Sutton wants change, and he's kind of pointing at WTC saying they have to change, but really I don't know if it's just WTC. I think there needs to be, if the pros are going to, if the pros want to make more money, I think we got to do something to kind of justify that. Sing for your supper, as Brett Sutton says. What can we do to make more money? What can we do to sexy up this rate, this sport, make it more interesting, make it more exciting? And I'm all, my ears are open for suggestions. But what do you think on this, Andreas?
Well, I think there's a lot of pro athletes. As pro athletes, we want to make more money, or there needs to be more money dispersed better. You and I were going back and forth the other day via text, and if you factor in the $750 fee that every pro athlete pays the WTC at the beginning of the year to be able to race all of their races, that's over $500,000 in just the fee from the athletes. And who knows how much of that is going into testing, as they say. Who knows how much is going into the bottom line. The fact of the matter is that's a lot of money. But going back to your question is, what do I think? Is it comes down to leverage. And at this point, I don't think the athletes have any, unfortunately. Just to make a comparison to golf or to baseball, if you substitute the pro athletes at Ironman Arizona, let's say there's 100 of them, and you take them out and you put 100 more amateurs, I think that race is still going to sell out in just the same amount of time. It's probably going to attract just as many people, and it's just not going to make too much of a difference. You take ourselves and you substitute us into the Yankees roster, and I guarantee you that there is no Yes Network that wants to broadcast the games. There is no, maybe like our family and friends might show up to watch us play at Yankee Stadium, but I guarantee you that's about it. So, unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot of leverage for the athletes at this point. And the ones that are going to continue to get money and get endorsements are those that are, A, winning a lot, and B, like you said, the ones that are visible. If it's not so by winning, by what they say and how they conduct themselves. So until that changes, I don't see what can change and how they can justify more money.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, because triathlon, there's other sports that kind of model this scenario. If you look at marathon running, for instance, 45,000 athletes did the Chicago Marathon this year. There were fewer than, there were about 100 elites or so at the very front of that race. And to the people at the very back of that field, do they really care that there's a bunch of 120, 130-pound East African guys, running an hour, 2, 3, 4 hours faster than them? And I think that some people might care a little bit, but they certainly don't care enough to, not do the race because, these athletes wouldn't be there. So if you look at the competitor group that, funds Rock and Roll Marathon, they stopped subsidizing athletes to bring them to races. I think there's still prize money, but they stopped paying athletes to show up. And that's because, races like, Rock and Roll Las Vegas, they're doing just fine. Do they need to pay to bring elites there? They're making the decision that they don't have to. But I think there is a certain amount of prestige to have fast athletes, to have the best athletes at your races. And I think if WTC were to follow the competitor group and kind of go down that path of kind of shunning pro athletes, and they basically do that already. There's not really a whole concerted effort to really support pros. There's very limited homestays. They do have a support group for maybe the top 10 in the world in terms of paying them to bring them to races. Like if you win Kona, for instance, Ironman might be inclined to work with their organizers to bring Craig Alexander or Leanda Cave to a certain race, but they're certainly not paying Kevin Tedonio to come race the race, and nor should they. But that being said, how much effort does it really take to put an athlete up in a homestay? And for someone like me, that makes a huge difference. You're talking about saving $750, $1,000 in hotel costs just by getting a homestay. And if I go to like Wildflower Triathlon, they put up all their pros in housing for free. That means we don't have to camp at the camp yard. That means we get free accommodations. When I go to Challenge Roth, Challenge Family Races puts up homestays, and people volunteer all around the community to put up athletes. So that kind of stuff makes a huge difference. So do I need to be flying around the world in a G5 Gulfstream? No. Would I like a homestay? Yes. And in an article I posted this week, actually it's interesting to me, this article I put up about the pros dilemma, what we're talking about here, actually has the most views of any post I've ever had since I've had my website, and I talk about the situation that the pros are in. And I don't think we need all the money, but there's little things we can do that would help support ourselves.
Yeah, and going back to your point about the homestays, I think the fact that at least in the WTC's case, the fact that they get kickbacks from people staying at hotels and they essentially sell out most of the hotels in and around the surrounding areas of any race. I mean, the pros are not their main target. They're not trying to keep you and the rest of the pros happy regardless of how successful racing they are. And this is not to knock you or anybody else that's not out there winning every race that they're entering. It's just that their focus is on making money, and by spending a lot of time and effort and potentially having a couple of people working to coordinate what it takes logistics-wise to have pros be taken care of, just even in a very minimal way like you're describing, I think that takes more resources that they have and more resources that they're willing to pay for, and I think really that's the bottom line. And when you look at a race like Wildflower, which I didn't know that they put up all the pros. I know that they offered free camping, but I thought that the cabins you still had to pay for. But regardless, I think somebody like that is in a position where they almost kind of have to do that because they want to draw some of the pros to do their races, and especially when they're, in particular Wildflower is competing right up against Ironman St. George 70.3, which is a U.S. 70.3 championship. So, it's a tough situation. Going to your article, to your blog post, you did bring up some good points. It's not a bad idea. We've talked about it before, having a series of different races from around the world. It's going to take something like that, in my opinion, to improve things for everybody.
Yeah, like you said earlier, it's all about leverage, and whether it be Challenge organizing their own series or their own championship, or them teaming up with some independent races, teaming up with Rev3. I think that, like I said in the blog post, you can't rely on athletes just saying, okay, look, we're going to protest WTC and race other races, because then people will screw with other people ultimately and sneak into races and get the prize money. So does it make sense to say I'm not going to do WTC races? I've kind of come out there and said next year I'm not going to do any Ironman races or 70.3 races, at least not in the first 6 months of the year. It's just why do that to myself? Why travel around the world to try to get points for a race that I don't really want to do? And that's what really killed me this year, Andres. We went to Kona this year to cover this race, and Kona is kind of like that Gollum in the Lord of the Rings. It's like the precious ring of Gollum. Age groupers and pros, they're precious. Kona, they want to go to Kona, have to do Kona. It's all they think about. And going there this year and cruising around on the cruiser bike for that race, I was just thinking to myself, why this race? I mean, it's a cool race that it's cool that the best in the world come out and do this race, but the course isn't exactly spectacular. There's almost no spectators on a lot of the Elite Drive or out on the Queen K. There's so many races around the world that are better races, and that get me more excited. And being a spectator at Kona and just going around the course this year, if it wasn't a World Championship race, I'd say it wouldn't be that much better than, say, Ironman Florida, which is kind of in the armpit of Florida.
And championship in name only, because there's quite a few people that will tell you, aside from the course and the beauty of it, quote unquote, and the weather, there's, in terms of how it's organized and the way they treat both age groupers and professional athletes, it doesn't seem to be that much different than any other race. And when I think of a championship race, I think of bells and whistles. I think of just kind of like a different, almost a different atmosphere. And though I've never been to the Olympics, I can guarantee you that if you go to the Olympics, it feels different than a world championship in any of those sports that participate in the Olympics. And I don't get the sense that Kona's like that.
Yeah, I think the one thing the WTC has for them, it's just kind of comparing it to Ironman. I mean, to marathon. Imagine if a company trademarked the name marathon, and you couldn't run a 26.2 mile race, and it wouldn't be a marathon unless you did a marathon incorporated race. So if you went to London, for instance, and you ran 26.2 miles, it's not a marathon. But if you go to Boston, that was a Marathon Inc. trademarked, copyrighted race. That's to me what was kind of interesting about this thing, is that they've basically trademarked a distance, and they've done a damn good job. Like I said in the blog post, Ironman is the only company in the entire world that I can think of, aside from Harley-Davidson, where people actually put a private company's logo on their body permanently with a tattoo. You see people all the time get an Ironman tattoo, and I mean it's a freaking brand, like the Cervelo on your shirt. I mean, it's a company. It's owned by a private equity company.
This is a tattoo. This is not a shirt.
But you know what I'm saying? It's just my mind kind of is boggled. Brett Sutton, like I said, his heart's in the right place. He has zero plan, zero strategy. I think the strategy's got to come from some of the independent companies, and maybe an organized group of athletes. Whether or not PROTA, which is apparently this professional triathlete association, which maybe it's underfunded, maybe they have the wrong people in the position, but I don't see them doing a whole lot. If anything, if you go to the website, I mean, if you go to the forum on the website, they have zero posts on their forum. I don't know how many views they get to their site, but I've gone to it the last couple of days, and it doesn't look like there's a whole lot happening.
Yeah, but both you and I are actually, they let non-professional athletes sort of join their association as long as you're somehow involved in the industry, and both you and I are there, and I don't think I've ever gotten any sort of communication from them or email about anything, and like you said, their forum is completely stagnant, and yeah, but going back to one of the points that you made is, it's almost a vicious cycle. There's a lot that you can do with other races, but the best example I can think of is of the power of that MDOT, which is one of two brands that people get tattooed on their body, like you said, is you take Ironman Canada last year, which was in Penticton. Sold out. It did for 30 years, one of the more popular races in the circuit. But the organizers didn't want to put up with Ironman anymore, from what I understand. So they sold it off to Challenge in the same race or the same venue around the same time of the year. They figured, you know what? People come here because it's the venue. It's a historic site. We'll get plenty of participation, even though it's not branded as an Ironman event. Well, guess what? They only got 800 or so participants for the challenge race, whereas the brand new Ironman Whistler, who nobody had done before, obviously, because it was the first year doing it, sold out. So it's crazy, but part of it is going to have to come from people like you and I that say, you know what, we really want to do the independent races. We want to go and do the hits. We want to do the wildflowers, even some of the local, Auburn Triathlon for you and I. It's going to have to come for the participants themselves, because they're the ones who are paying for it, and that's got a lot of weight.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to educating people, because if you take someone that gets into the sport, say I go to my office in Chicago and say I'm doing this iron distance triathlon. I'd say, oh, you mean an Ironman? And I could say, no, I mean I'm doing this challenge race, and they wouldn't know what the hell I'm talking about, what I'm trying to say. Ironman, people get that. They can get their heads around it pretty easily. It's easy to brag about. People can kind of understand that. But Andreas, here's the thing. People spend their lives, their money, and their effort and time and energy and spirit in this race. I think that there's too much of a market here for this to go to waste. I feel like Ironman right now is such a generic experience. As someone that's raced all around the world at different WTC races, you get the same backpacks now, and not actually it's the 70.3s. You don't even get a separate backpack. They actually just take this little tag and they put a different tag on the same bag, and it's the same experience. It's very generic. There's very little feeling to it, and at least Rev3 or Challenge, I feel like it's like a community experience. I feel like you get a better, more it's just a better feeling race, and WT3 I feel like WTC, it's kind of like going to McDonald's. You're not going to have the best meal at McDonald's, but you're going to get the same McDonald's in Beijing as you're going to get in New York City, as the same you're going to get in Gary, Indiana. It's going to be the same experience. And if you want McDonald's food, you want that same crappy cheeseburger, go to an Ironman race. But if you want some fine dining, you want to get your taste buds wowed, do a challenge race, do a Rev3 race, do Auburn Triathlon, do the Muscle Man in Geneva, New York, do some of these crazy races, do Norseman in Norway. Some of these races are going to really test you, and really when you come away from it, it's going to be a totally different experience than you'd have at an Ironman.
Oh, I 100% agree with you, and so how do you and I make a difference? I mean, it's just, we're two people, and if we start talking about, grandiose plans, as they say, a plan without here I am again trying to come up with a saying, and I'm going to botch it, but something without a plan is a wish. And what we can do is, at least what I think I can do, is put my money where my mouth is, and unfortunately, by this point of the year, I've signed up for two WTC races, and because of the refund policy, I'm not getting any sort of money back. But I am going to make an effort to do these independent races, because I think a lot of what you say is true, and you get a completely different feeling, a very unique feeling from race to race. I think that's probably the best place for anybody to start. And I'll make a point to talk about the races, why I like them, maybe what I didn't like, or where WTC might excel better, and just give people an idea of why they should check out something like this. But I think it's got to start small and build from there. And it's certainly not going to happen overnight. But I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah, I really think that if you get enough people talking negative, I think WTC can change. I want to be someone that can be a positive force for change, and if it has to be just saying, hey, I'm not going to do your races, and I'm going to try to talk as much as I can, be as vocal as I can, try to get people to do other races, I think they're going to listen. And if they don't, then they're missing a big opportunity. And I think the last point I'll make is that they are a for-profit company. They are a private company. I believe they're owned by a private equity company. Private equity companies are in the business of building things up and selling them for lots and lots of money. So they're obviously building up. They're making more money year over year. So if you look at just the P&L for them, they're doing fine. But in the long term, what's going to happen? What's the trend? And what's sustainable? And what are people going to be wanting to do 10 years from now? Because the people that the market. A lot of these people are going to be talking to their friends and getting people into the sport. And 10 years from now, if they keep doing what they're doing, it's not going to be working because people want a different, unique experience. So it's going to be interesting to see how WTC evolves. I think they can change. I think they can do better. I know they can do better. And right now, all I can do as an athlete, as a person, on This Week in Triathlon, is just say, I'm not going to do any Ironman races until I see the situation getting better. I'm going to do independent races. I'm going to do Rev3 races. I'm going to do challenge races. I'm going to do races that inspire me, that are fun, that are exciting, that are in different places. And that's what I can do. And it'll be interesting to what Brett Sutton says.
Yeah, I'll have to keep an eye on what he does next, and I think you will too. But think of it this way. I mean, this is when you're stepping away from that brand, you're thinking of promoting the sport. I mean, you're essentially stepping away from promoting one brand in particular and promoting the sport as a whole, because who knows what's going to happen when Providence, the Providence Group, which I think is the name of this company that owns the WTC, what happens when they sell it off and whoever takes it over. So I'll see it from that point of view. It's just promoting the sport in general and instead of just promoting one brand. So we'll see. I mean, I have no problem doing it. I know you don't, at least for the foreseeable future. And change is to come from small little places, and maybe we can be a part of it.
Absolutely. Well, like my wine glass that is empty, I am empty of comments, and I'm going to go refill my glass here. But Andreas, as always,
well, we can't go yet. We were asked a question by. And you can go refill your glass of wine if you need to before we answer it. But John Montgomery of Scottsdale, Arizona. Actually, I don't think he's actually from Scottsdale, but we both know him from our days in Arizona. He asked us if actually he's thinking about doing both Ironman Florida and Ironman Arizona in 2014. Which is pretty insane if you ask me. They're only separated by about 2 weeks, but he wants to go do Florida since he got in, and it's a good vacation spot for he and his family to spend a few days while he's there racing. And he's also thinking about doing Ironman Arizona 2 weeks later. So what are some of the tips that we could give him, some of the advice that we could give him if he's thinking about doing that, and what he should look out for? I've never done such a thing. I don't know if you have, but I would say do one of the races, stay off your feet as much as you can, maybe mix in a couple of workouts in between the 2 weeks, but try to recover as much as possible and hope for the best by the time Ironman Arizona rolls by.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. We see professional athletes do it all the time. Is it good, long term in your health? That's something I'm not really sure I can answer. But what I can tell you is that people do it. I've done it. Some athletes have been able to pull it off. Some not so well. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the Tour de France, which is a 3-week race, they're racing 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day, for 3 weeks straight. And you're talking about doing, basically the swim and the bike isn't what hurts your body. It's really the marathon. And if you have if your back's not bothering you, if you have some shoulder issues, that okay, the swim and the bike might hurt you a little bit. But it's that marathon and coming off the marathon. So what do you do? I think the first race, obviously, you build. And the one thing I would suggest on race is just maybe just doing a little bit less taper than you normally would for an Ironman race. I think some people taper a little bit too much for an Ironman, but especially if you're trying to do two, I probably wouldn't taper as much. And really, if you think about your body, the biggest area to become detrained, because you have to take time after an Ironman. Most people that don't train 30-plus hours a week need to take some time off after a hard marathon. I would maybe suggest running in some training shoes rather than racing flats, especially at Ironman Florida, just because it's going to save your legs a little bit. But you need to focus on recovery, getting your legs up, icing, massage, doing whatever you can, doing some active recovery in the days following the race just to make sure you're flushing everything out and you're feeling good. But the biggest area to become detrained is really your heart. Your heart stroke volume actually goes away relatively quickly. If you think about your heart like a balloon, the stroke volume of your heart blows up because of pressure. That's comes back from your muscles when they're working hard. So if you don't do anything for a week, your heart can shrink, and that stroke volume actually shrinks up. Your VO2 max goes down. Each time your ejection fraction goes down. So every time your heart beats, less blood is going out to your working muscles, less blood is going out to your lungs. So essentially, you can't go as hard. So what to do? I think you got to focus on doing some key sessions in between those races. You definitely got to rest, but if you can do some key sessions, especially on the bike, just because I feel like you need to recover your running legs as much as possible. So I'd be doing more riding and doing some really high intensity. You don't need to be doing any long 5-6 hour races between these races because you already have the base. The base is there. Those little cellular adaptations are already there. They're not going to be going away. But taking care of that stroke volume and some of the neuromuscular things, that's really what you should be focusing on between, if you have a week or 3-week rest between races.
So, in short, quality over quantity when it comes to those workouts.
Exactly.
But regardless of what your time goals are, take it as recovering like a pro, like you've mentioned before, and make it a big effort to recover.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully he does get into Ironman Arizona for next year, and he can let us know how it goes in 2014, and if he actually uses any of our advice.
But swim as much as you want, bike as much as you want, but in between, you just can't simply do as much running, and maybe do some aqua running or maybe some running on an Ultra G treadmill, something like that. If you have access to one, running in the water, maybe doing some drills, things like that. That's all the advice I got.
Well, it's good enough for me. I hope it's good enough for John, and I think now you're free to go and drink the rest of your bottle of wine.
Yeah, sorry, I'm always trying to cut you off early, and I know we always have a list of things to talk about, and I'm always like, oh, we're out of here, and it's like, what about the rest?
Well, the only reason why I remember is because I actually write them down, but if I didn't, I probably would have forgotten the same way you did, and we kind of, he asked us last week, and we talked a lot about Helmetgate last week, so we didn't get a chance to address it then. I told him for sure we would this week. So anyway, thanks for participating, John.
And as always, we invite our viewers to participate in the conversation on facebook.com/thisweekintriathlon. Andreas and I, we are working on a website, so we're going to have that website up hopefully soon by the end of the year, and we'll be posting our videos and blog posts and getting some feedback there as well. So thanks again for tuning in, and look forward to wrapping up Ironman Arizona next week.
All right, Kevin. See you.